Come here. A man returns to age 18. He discovers his son is bullied by the class bully. Seeing the bully picking on him, the bully hurls the ball at him, but he catches it with one hand. The bully wants the ball back. Then he fakes a move, scaring the bully to cover his head. The bully feels ashamed. He steps forward ready to fight, but he's stopped by a teacher. The bully leaves with a threat. Afterward, he's getting angrier, just about to vent by buying a pack of cigarettes. He finds out the clerk is his daughter. You are vile. What are you doing here? What? Isn't it class time? This confuses the girl. Then the boss comes over to ask what happened. He claims to be the girl's dad. I'm her dad. Hearing this, the girl calls him crazy. He suddenly panics. He can't believe she called her dad crazy. And he tries to drag his daughter home. The girl struggles fiercely. The boss sees this scene, tells him to leave or he'll call the police. So David quickly releases his daughter, letting her go home with him. But when he reaches the door and sees his reflection, he is taken aback. He's transformed to look 18. He goes outside, seeing himself in the window. His face shows disbelief, and the window rolls down. The driver asks, do you need something? David quickly asks, how old do I look? But the driver just drives away. He then arrives at his friend Curly's house, but Curly mistakes him for a thief and knocks him out cold. Just as Curly picks up a photo to strike, he realizes David looks exactly like the friend in the photo. When David wakes up, he tells Curly about changing to age 18. What do you plan to do? Remembering those two unruly kids, David asks Curly to be his dad. Thus, David, as Curly's son, returns to high school. Who would have thought he'd end up in his daughter's class? Sophia was shocked to see David. She suddenly remembered yesterday's scene. You crazy person!
Sophia Hong, speak properly. Not long after class started,
He received a call from his wife. Still adjusting, he got up to answer the call, but his teacher quickly called him back. He sadly said he was off to the restroom. His wife urged him to set a divorce date soon. He falsely claimed he was on a trip, then he hung up the phone. He then went to the restroom. He heard someone was locked inside, so he helped open the door. To his surprise, it was his own son inside. He angrily asked his son who did this, but Sean didn't even recognize the young David. I asked you, who did this? He warned David not to say he let him out. David anxiously followed him out. He needed to ask Sean directly, but his daughter stopped him in the hall. Sophia led David to the rooftop and brought two girls for courage. But David wasn't afraid at all. He informed Sophia about Sean being bullied. Why didn't you tell that? Sophie thought he must be going crazy wanting to be a dad. She flipped around and walked away. She even looked back to give David a gesture. This left David stunned. Is this still his obedient daughter? After class, Sophie learned that her brother was bullied. Hey, James. But David found the bully first. Let's fight.
Fight quickly!
Thus David and James were about to. Hearing the news, Sophie rushed to the playground. Both sides were ready for a showdown. They decided to settle it with a basketball game. James promised that if he won, he would never bully Sean again. But if David lost, he'd face 10 blows. As the captain of the basketball team, James felt confident. He had no clue what he was in for. David, who once had a chance to be a pro player, David returned to age 18, returned to his peak physically and skill-wise. However, their teamwork wasn't enough. He quickly lost 4 points. Even Sophie silently felt nervous for them. Seeing his son lose hope, David chose to break the standstill first. When the ball reached David's hands again, he made a feint. He made a slick turn to score. All the girls cheered loudly. James, feeling overlooked, was quite disheartened. Then David made a spot jump shot, and a three-pointer tied the score. Once a basketball lead, David easily took the lead. As his son regained confidence, David and Sean's teamwork started to gel. James, witnessing the scene, was quite annoyed. Encouraged, Sean began to turn the tide. He and David teamed up for the last shot. This won them the game. It was 10 years ago. David's dream was to play basketball, and he fell in love with his now wife in school. To take care of these unexpected children, David had to quit basketball to support his family. Diligently, David worked hard, thinking he would earn his boss recognition. Unbeknownst to him, his boss gave away the loan promotion to a scheming colleague, because that colleague had connections, but was instead assigned to a remote countryside job. In a fit of anger, he fired his boss. Due to the busy work schedule, he couldn't pay attention to his children's growth. This created a rift between them. Even meals together led to fights. Work pressure and his children's rebellion made him boisterous. This also kept his wife sleepless all night, watching her husband sleep beside her. The wife made a bold decision, and this crazy act caused their bond completely broke. Work and home stress left him worn. He went to the gym alone. Looking at the accolades he once earned on the basketball court, he fell into deep thought. He walked slowly to the court. His eyes were filled with reluctance. He took a textbook jump shot. The ball soared through the air in a graceful arc. But just then, a lightning bolt appeared in the sky. Just like that, he was back at 18 with memories. James, who faced losses on the court. David saw this and was about to teach him a lesson, but James was suddenly knocked out by a punch. James got up to retaliate, but he is kicked out by his opponent. In the end, the two started fighting. Ethan was knocked down by a punch. At this moment, James breaks them up with a kick. He picks up a stick, ready to attack, but David catches him. James struggles twice, but he can't escape his hold. Suddenly, Ethan stands up. He throws James into the hallway. Then, the teacher arrives just in time to stop them. After that, both are taken to the office for a lecture. After leaving the office, James meets Sophie in the hallway. Unexpectedly, Sophie punches him in the stomach. As she leaves, she warns him not to bully little brother Sean anymore, and this hit truly affects the school bully. David is troubled by these problematic kids. He finds his daughter smoking here too. He instantly yells in anger. This startles Sophie. She thought it was the teacher. David scolds her for not behaving at her young age, but Sophie tells him to mind his own business. As they talk, Sophie seems to see something. She turns and bolts. Then the teacher shows up. A slap lands on David's head. David turned to take a look. A former high school classmate. The teacher thought he seemed familiar, but couldn't recall who he was. The teacher asked who else was here. If you confess, you might get leniency. So David confessed about his daughter and suggested that the teacher discipline her. Watching the teacher hit his daughter, this broke David's heart. He grabbed the teacher's hand and said a verbal reprimand was enough. He turned and had the homeroom call parents. David saw that it was his wife coming. He quickly turned away. The teacher asked where Sophie got her smoke. Sophie said she stole it from her mom. Hearing this, David became agitated. He stood up to scold the mother and daughter for smoking. At that moment, his wife looked at David in disbelief. David was cornered against the wall. She walked up and started pinching his face. The teacher quickly intervened, saying this didn't look good in school. He looked just like your dad when he was young. Curly made it just in time and falsely claimed this was his son. Don was puzzled. Why does Curly's son look just like David when he was young? At that moment, the teacher suggested they return to class. They finally left. That night, Dawn was troubled by her divorce from David. Her friend asked her to hang out. They ran into a classmate from school. The man had always had a crush on Dawn. He even offered to drive Dawn home after their date. Before Dawn could refuse, he happily ran out to get his car. Dawn and her friend walked out of the shop. Her friend noticed how down she looked. Count to 10 and open her eyes. Whoever the first man she sees, she should date him. Encouraged by her friend, Dawn decided to try something bold. Watching her strange antics, Hassersby gave her upstairs. Just then, her friend suddenly got a phone call and then left. Dawn was still walking with eyes shut. She recalled her chaotic life, the stress of work, home discontent. Her children's rebellion deeply troubled her. But just then, a car speeds toward her. At that critical moment, a boy suddenly grabs her. Dawn looks at the boy who saved her. Memories pull her back to the moment she met her husband. What Dawn doesn't know is the boy before her is her husband at 18. David reminds Dawn to be careful, but then, facing the abrupt act from the boy, Dawn does not flinch. Unexpectedly, David just sniffed her alcohol scent. Dawn feels embarrassed. Alcohol scent. Just then, her friend arrives after the call. She can't believe Dawn's luck. Her prince is a high schooler. The PE teacher also drives over. Hearing the teacher will take Dawn home, David quickly asks for a ride from the teacher too. The teacher, being a gentleman, has to oblige. Young and handsome arrival, she seems to recall. This boy resembles her unrequited first love from years ago. This startles David quite a bit. After the trip, David got out of the car with Dawn. He was about to leave, but Dawn called him back. Don't drink anymore.
Don't you want to play basketball? Your Uncle David was a star player. Do you know how to do it? Practicing hard is key. Staying clear of smoke and booze. Hearing his wife say these things,
David felt a mix of emotions. It was her concern that pushed him, making him resolve to pursue his dreams again. He set his alarm clock, then he started practicing basketball fundamentals. He aimed to achieve the dreams he once left unfinished. Meanwhile, in Dawn's mind, she frequently thought of David. At this time, she seemed to recall. She rushed home and found the album. Then she went to Curly's house to question if he was home. David was taken aback. Could he have already been recognized her now? Dawn didn't know him. She thought he was home David's son. She even compared it to David's old photos. Curly quickly explained her mom looks a lot like David. Dawn doubted that. She pulled out her phone to confront David. Meanwhile, David's phone was in his pocket. That made David panic. Curly quickly told David that he was going to be late for school. David took the chance to go. He went out to take the call. Dawn asked him if Gavin was his son, but David said Gavin was Curly's son. Dawn didn't believe it at all. Hearing David's silence, Dawn suddenly had a terrifying thought. Could Gavin be the son of these two men? At school, David saw his daughter suddenly faint. He swiftly carried Sophie to the hospital. After hearing the news, Dawn rushed to the hospital. After a doctor's check, Sophie was fine. A nearby injured girl was being bandaged. He recalled when Sophie was hurt as a kid, when he carried her to the hospital. Now Sophie had grown up. He couldn't help but touch Sophie's head. At that moment, Sophie suddenly woke up. She quickly swiped David's hand away. Then she asked what he was doing. At that moment, Sophie had no idea. The man in front of her was her father. Sophie then sits up. David says you passed out and I carried you to the hospital. At this moment, Sophie recalls. So she says, if you carry me, you should leave quietly. Where will your hand go? Do you not want it? David instantly finds it amusing. You must be like this with other men too. This confuses Sophie even more. She rushes over quickly. Soon, David's fake dad, Curly, arrives at the hospital. She is grateful, so she tells Curly, your son teaches well. Let's be in-laws now. When they hear this, David and his bestie spit out their drinks in shock. It turns out David was a heartthrob in his youth. He spins the ball with one finger. Plus, his signature charming smile completely won the hearts of countless girls. This turn and glance marked the beginning of the secret crush, and expresses her feelings for him. If all goes well, she receives a gentle rejection from David. He wanted to be a pro basketball player. He lacks the energy for romance now. He returned Eileen's gift to her. But Eileen, who was rejected, did not give up. She continued to support David as always. She happily arrived at the gym, but she saw David playing basketball with another girl. He sweetly ruffled her hair. At that moment, Eileen wished she could tear David apart. Not long ago, on a day filled with cherry blossoms, quick-witted David saved. The two shared a deep gaze, and with the very suggestive movements, their heartbeats began to race. David quietly developed feelings for Dawn. On this day, a new student came to class. David was surprised to find it was the girl he fell for at first sight. Perhaps it was fate's arrangement. They even became desk mates. Dawn also recognized David, and she greeted him warmly. David's face instantly turned beet red. He heard a pretty girl switch classes. The boys immediately rushed to the windows, all just to admire the stunning beauty of Dawn. David also sneakily watched from the crowd. The girl he had a crush on. Facing Dawn's warm greetings, David shyly turned and ran away. That day after school, Janet just said she left her umbrella. The boys quickly appeared, each holding an umbrella. They hurriedly invited Janet to walk with them, just as Jenna was confused by this. Jenna, come walk with me. Sure. Thus, David successfully caught up with the girl he liked. That day, a frustrated Eileen brought along a few friends. They aggressively confronted Jenna. They demanded a showdown with her, but Jenna took them down single-handedly. The next day, Eileen was extorted by some girls. Jenna happened to witness the scene as she walked by. Her friends were terrified and fled, but Jenna rushed forward to greet them. With a lead, Jenna took down 3 of them. Then she helped Eileen escape. After such a life and death bond, and Eileen decided for her best friend to secretly hide her feelings for David. Years later, at a reunion, Eileen became a somewhat notable lawyer. Once a spirited youth on the basketball court, what does he look like now? The girls were let down by the greasy old man. They felt huge disappointment.
They thought David had arrived. Oh, David.
Eileen's expression turned to one of disgust. All her beautiful memories of youth shattered. It's been so long since I've seen everyone.
Let's eat. My memories have all turned dark.
Eileen surprisingly met her college crush again. She squeezed under David's umbrella. How she wished time would freeze at that moment. In the hospital, Dawn came to pay for her daughter, but when the nurse checked, she found the bill was already paid. It was from Sophie's PE teacher who had paid the fee. She called to ask where David was. The report had already reached Dawn's hand, so Dawn reproached him. Why are you not at all concerned that our daughter is ill? Why are you always absent when we meet you? Now they no longer needed David. After the call ended, David was also very angry. As he left, David heard Sophie with her boyfriend. My dad doesn't need us at all. David left sadly after hearing this. He had been right there with them all along. The next day was the deadline for David and Dawn's divorce, but David still didn't show up. Just as the judge was about to announce, David, apt to be 18, suddenly appeared in court. Is he about to show who he is? Dawn saw David, and David took out a letter. He said it was from home, David, to be delivered. Dawn, you're such a great person. I've overreached with you above any choice in life. Today, I will regret this. Hope you can leave without regrets. But when the letter hit the den, he realized it was completely blank. It was all just David's inner thoughts. The next day, David was on his way to school. He heard classmates discussing Sophie's mother's divorce. He saw the bully tailing his daughter. David felt anxious right away. Sophie looked at the letter scattered all around. She was about to get a new trash bag, but then she spotted James behind her. Sophie thought he was looking for trouble. Unexpectedly, James comforted her. He said every home has its woes. That night, Sophie cried alone for a long time. The bully saw everything. After Sophie left, the principal suddenly appeared. He asked who had made the mess on the ground. James not only admitted he did it, but also helped Sophie clean up the trash. David saw the sea from a distance. This changed David's perception of James. That evening, after school, David noticed James and a few others quietly following Sean. He quickly followed them. Sean started playing basketball alone on the court. He suddenly recalled asking his aunt earlier why he quit basketball. Sean said he wasn't interested in basketball, but now he was secretly playing alone. So he took out his phone. He called Sean as dad. Sean was surprised his dad asked these questions. He didn't know Dad was 18 now, and was secretly watching him. David wished his son could open up to him. Honestly, I'll support you if you're interested. But strong-willed Sean chooses to bear it all alone. David decides to use his current identity to explore his son Sean's thoughts. From that day on, the two skilled and fond of basketball quickly become good friends. After Sophie got out, Michael made excuses to visit her. He even helped her carry things. He then bought a boxed meal. At checkout, Sophie asked if he needed a takeout, but David said it was for her. This scene happened to be seen by Michael nearby. He thought David liked Sophie too. Dawn also received good news on her end. During a crucial interview, the original host couldn't come due to some issues, so Dawn had to step in. She hurriedly changed and arrived at the scene. He also stressed that this interview was very important, but in the interview, the players, to celebrate their win, prepared to pour water on the captain. Then the chubby guy came over with water, but stumbled in the process. Water splashed on Dawn. David's son witnessed the scene on TV. Dawn skillfully eased things. 86. And he managed to keep his job. David saw the good news about his wife. He joyfully danced in the corridor. Classmates passing by couldn't help but laugh. Sean happened to pass by. He hid his face with a book, acting unknown, but David insisted on taking him to dinner. Later, Dawn arrived at school. She told her son the good news of her acceptance. The two embraced joyfully to celebrate. Suddenly, David joined in. This left the two of them bewildered. Dawn pushed him away. She wondered who this person was, but David shamelessly leaned closer. That night, David found out by chance his wife was dating the athlete he interviewed earlier. Dawn sprained her ankle while leaving. The two hurried over to check, but Dawn only cared about her high heels. David watched another man help his wife. He was instantly jealous. Thankfully, after the doctor's check, Dawn was not badly hurt. At this time, David was outside fixing Dawn's shoes, and he also bought a pair of flip-flops. Meanwhile, Zihan was buying Dawn a pair of sneakers. When David got to the hospital, he caught Jason helping Dawn put on her shoes. David returned the repair high heels to Dawn, but he did not fetch the slippers. Then the slippers fell apart. Just as she was about to fall, David hurried over to catch her. Then David gifted her the slippers he had just bought. Eileen already had a crush on David. She wore the slippers and laughed. The next day, Eileen couldn't wait to call Dawn out. On meeting, Eileen asked Dawn if her 40-year-old friend liked the teen. She kept thinking about it.
It made her heart race. What a crazy woman. After all, he is a minor. Oh, that's just dirty.
At that moment, Dawn's phone rang. As she stepped out to call, Eileen hid her face in shame. At that moment, David walked into the store to find Curly. David patiently offered his comfort. Eileen nearby overheard the name David home and immediately approached them. David and Curly quickly stood up. In a panic, David called out Eileen's name, but Eileen hadn't even told him her name. At this point, Eileen was even more sure he was David home. Just then, Dawn returned. Dawn said she had something to do and left first, but Eileen called out to her. She planned to tell her the secret, but she was too thrilled to speak. Dawn rushed to leave. After Dawn left, Curly falsely claimed he had just been on the phone with David Home, but Eileen didn't believe it. She took out her phone and called David Home, seeing the phone on the table ringing. David requested Eileen not to tell Dawn the secret. Remembering he was her first love, Eileen had to agree. Fuming. In the school, Josie began to close the distance with Sophie. He even chose to be late on purpose, seeing Sophie rushing out of breath at the school gate. The classmates all begged the teacher for a break. Only the school bully lazily enjoyed it, because he could finally have his way.
Me help carrying your back? Sophie turned down the bully.
But in the next moment, Michael snatched Sophie's backpack. It was on time to support Sophie. He chose to run latch with her. It must be said, this brown bully lost big time. Then Bully tossed his backpack to Michael, but Michael cruelly threw it down on the ground. He picked up speed to catch Sophie. Now, Bully truly shot himself in the foot. He sadly had to go back for his bag. After class, Sophie planned to go to the shop with her friends. Carelessly, she left her pencil case on her seat. Michael was about to stand up to retrieve it, but he bumped into James instead. They tussled for the pencil case, gripping tight. As they secretly competed, trying to see who would win, Sophie suddenly turned back. She snatched her pencil case back. That ended their silent battle. The school celebration is near. Sophie volunteered to gather photos. Michael quickly followed suit. Bully was about to raise his hand, but his buddy pushed his hand down. He had already signed up for the basketball team. At that moment, David raised his hand. He filled the last spot. Seeing them leave together, Bully was extremely annoyed. He wished he could kick his buddy in front of him. Inside the music room, Sophie got hit on the head by the falling box. Michael and David rushed over to check on her. They found a big bruise on Sophie's forehead. This worried David, her father, greatly. Michael, feeling jealous, couldn't show it. He said David's hands were too dusty. Then, Sophie went with her friend to get something. David stopped Michael as he was leaving. Do you like Sophie? What's it to you? It seems this guy really does. Now I can relax. But that's not okay either. Men are all wolves. Victor bluntly confronted David.
Do you like Sophie? Of course. As a woman? Sophie is mine.
David's fatherly love went up the charts. The school bully instantly trembled in fear. It turned out all that was David's fantasy. The bully warned David to behave. Don't tell anyone the secret. Unknowingly, he was provoking his future father-in-law. David breathed a long sigh. That night, Sophie worked at a convenience store. Michael finally gathered the courage to confess his feelings. But unexpectedly, James interrupted. He bought 2 drinks at checkout. I heard the basketball team got a new coach.
Is he a good guy? Are you worried about me now?
I have to say, James is truly full of himself.
Here, take this drink.
He snatched the drink and boasted. At this time, David arrived at the store. He happened upon these 2 bags. I'm here on your dad's orders.
What's up? Let's talk while we walk.
In the end, they awkwardly left. On the way, David asked Sophie if she liked Michael or James. Sophie replied that she liked neither. Michael is a childhood friend, but James always bullied her brother. After they split up, Sophie walked alone into an alley. She felt as if someone was following her. Just at that moment, a man in black approached her out of instinct. But she was quickly caught by the opponent. But then, in a flash, Sophie took the opponent down. The weak-looking girl was so strong. Just then, the man in black slowly got out. He pulled out a 40-inch long knife. Seeing this chaos, Sophie felt a bit tense. She remembered her coach's tips. She had to run. Watching him close in on her, Sophie quickly stepped back and held her bag in front of her. Suddenly, she hit the alarm on her back. She ran off while he was distracted. Right around a corner, a boy suddenly rushed out to help and quickly subdued the man in black. It was David, who had just left. They were soon brought to the police. Sophie's mother, Dawn, hurried over. Seeing her daughter safe, she sighed with relief. At that moment, David was still relentless, claiming if he hadn't arrived in time, the outcome would have been dire. He insisted such scum should be locked up. The police said there were no cameras at the scene. We'll act according to the law after the probe. The man in black bit back upon finding no evidence. Claiming he's the real victim, Sophie's mother suddenly appeared. A slap left the man in black utterly stunned. Then she let him have it. The police rushed forward to intervene, but suddenly Sophie's grandma showed up. Learning her granddaughter was bullied, she became anxious. She quickly jumped into the fray. Those crazy women! Seeing him dare to insult her mother, David also joined the fray. The scene quickly went out of hand. Even the police couldn't separate them. Meanwhile, the police found out that the man in black was a known criminal. They found a stash of hidden photos in his bag. At this point, they hoped to turn a blind eye. Then they covered the indoor camera with a broom. After leaving the station, Grandma thanked David, holding his hand. But what David said next shocked everyone. It's okay, mother-in-law. Mother-in-law?
You're a bit eager there. Actually, I'm the mother-in-law. Unexpectedly, they hadn't actually recognized David.
They thought he was into Sophie. Lucky for us, Sophie saved the day. This gave David a chance to escape the scene. This meeting greatly increased Sophie's fondness for David. He told her that if she wanted her child to succeed, she had to please the leaders of the sports bureau. He handed down a note. Have her attached to the cart each month. If she didn't comply with his request, her son Sean's basketball career would be over. During the next training, he wouldn't let them train, only making them clean up. At night, the school's bully saw the PE teacher's car and asked his classmates to leave first. As he spotted his father, when he reached the office door, he noticed Dad gifting the PE teacher the starter on the basketball team. When it was time for the actual game, the skills of these rich kids were lacking, and the score steadily widened. Meanwhile, the 2 strongest players were on the bench. Watching their team about to lose, the principal spoke with the PE teacher, berating him fiercely. claiming that he would be fired if they lost the game. He had to swap in the two, with David and Sean entering the game. The game began to turn around. David showcased incredible leadership skills. With solid fundamentals, he dodged one and scored easily. The score was closing in. David passed the ball to Sean. Hef's teamwork thrilled the crowd. With the game nearing its end, David took a jump shot. The basketball arced beautifully through the air. He successfully secured victory in this game. After the game, Don gathered all teams. The parents of the players were gathered. James' dad stood up and said, if they reveal the truth, everyone will be punished, and their children will be disqualified from the competition. At this moment, Don countered, even though we can't be great parents, at least we shouldn't make our children feel ashamed. This reminded James' dad of what James said. I find that very embarrassing. Then, Don continued, Mr. Choi illegally operated a bar. The angry man wanted to get physical with Don, but he quickly realized he picked the wrong person. Seeing Don's skills, everyone was shocked. Then the police arrived, identified by the crowd. The police took away the PE teacher. This incident made the principal realize there was corruption in the school. In front of all the parents, the school's PE teacher was changed. After an impressive win, James decided to confess to Sophie. Coincidentally, David found out even more absurd. He asked David for ideas. Seeing James full of confidence, then he remembered Sophie once said, she hates when guys confess by singing in front of many people. So David deliberately told James that Sophie likes when guys confess by singing in front of a crowd. Was that a good thing to say? What does that mean? Sophie. And James really did it, and he succeeded. Suddenly, he heard classmates asking James what the plan was for his date with Sophie. Will they hold hands or kiss? Seeing James looking so smart, David's face quickly changed, and David followed his daughter to the date spot. He thought the baseball field was crowded. James probably won't do anything inappropriate. He then turned to leave. Thinking about the scene of James kissing his daughter, David rushed in quickly, then sat down directly next to Sophia. At that moment, Michael came over with drinks. Seeing Michael, David was stunned. He asked Sophia if she wasn't at the game with James. Turns out after the confession yesterday, Sophia didn't want James to be embarrassed. She secretly returned the flowers to James. Michael happened to see that scene, so the next day Michael bought 2 baseball tickets, and he asked Sophia to watch the game. Seeing Sophia hadn't agreed to James' confession, David felt relieved instantly. Meanwhile, Tina was heartbroken alone. Sophia burned herself in chem class. David hurriedly took her to rinse it off. Michael was immediately worried upon seeing this. He went to the pharmacy for Sophia. David also arrived at the pharmacy. Michael knew David was buying for Sophia, so he plans to find Sophie before David does. When he gets to class, he finds Sophie is not there. Then he goes to the playground. He sees David apply medicine to Sophie. At this moment, Sophie remembers when she was hurt before. Michael, witnessing this, recalls James' words to Sophie that day. James asked Sophie if she had someone she liked. Sophie nodded. Michael assumed Sophie liked David. Another female classmate also witnessed the scene. The classmate thinks David likes Sophie too. Heavy rain starts at night. David runs into Dawn. He insists on walking Dawn home. He angles the umbrella at Dawn. Just then, a speeding car passes by. David hurriedly shields Dawn from the splash. He pulls her tightly into his embrace. But to her surprise, David boldly takes off his shirt. Andy Dawn is shocked into speechlessness. Embarrassed, she drops the shirt and flees. He congratulates her for training with her show today. David, hidden nearby, wishes he could rip Sihon apart. Seeing Dawn's joyful expression, David finally couldn't hold back. Don't laugh freely, it can confuse. Avoid misunderstandings. Dawn felt completely confused. That guy likes you. Dawn was immediately stunned. Meanwhile, a classmate found them. She admitted she failed to confess to David because the person he likes is Sophie. Sophie was also shocked. At night, the family watched TV. The mother and daughter got absorbed. Dawn recalled how David had treated her. The mother was troubled by her ex-husband. The daughter stressed over her dad. That night, Dawn attended a party hosted by Curly. After spotting David, Dawn started to dodge him. In a chase and flight, Dawn accidentally fell into the pool. David and Jihoon witnessed the scene. They jumped into the water, planning to be the hero, only to awkwardly find it was shallow to their waists. After changing, Dawn casually heard from her daughter's friend that David actually likes Sophie. Then Dawn took the initiative to find David, apologized for being rude to him in the morning, thanked him for caring for the kids during this time. At that moment, David wanted to reveal the truth. Looking at the charming Dawn before him, David ultimately couldn't hold back. He took Dawn's hand and kissed her spontaneously. But the scene was caught by the teacher. Everyone turned around. They were all stunned. Startled, Dawn pushed David away and then gave him a big shove. Party's over. Sophie told her mom she won't go to school. Dawn was really mad to hear that, which made finding a job difficult. So she opposed Sophie skipping college. Sophie felt it was their mistake during school. That caused her surprise birth. She blamed her parents for never caring about her. Not far away, David felt heartbroken witnessing this. The next day at school, David handed Sophie the savings book, claiming it was from her dad. Child. It's all about the journey of their growth recorded by mom and dad. Behind each deposit is a phrase. Seeing that, Sophie broke down in tears. That night, Sophie called her dad. After the call ended, Sophie cried deeply sad. He decided to tell Dawn the truth and revealed how he became younger, but Dawn simply didn't buy it. She thought David was pulling a prank and told him to return the phone to David. The next day, Dawn recalled what David had said the night before at work, so she searched online for ways to become younger. She thought she must be going crazy. How could she believe such nonsense? The clerk told her, "I'm a fan of yours because a student bought shoes from me. They shared many stories about you, so that's why I follow you." At that moment, Dawn recalled her past. She realized how much Gavin resembled Hong Dae-yang. It was then she knew Gavin was Hong Dae-yang. He and Sean made the national team. Sean was very happy to hear this, but Hong Dae-yang couldn't feel happy. Sean called his dad, hoping he could come to watch his games. Hong Dae-yang hid nearby and answered the phone, unsure how to explain. That night, Hong Dae-yang found Dawn. He told her he would find a way to change back. Dawn asked, "What about your basketball dream? You and the kids are more important than dreams." Hearing these words, Dawn thinks she ruined David's dream. Once David left for himself, he gave up basketball for the kids. Now the chance is in sight. Yet David still chooses to give up. Then David returns to the place where he once became young. He wants to go back the same way, but he fails. The next day drifts by. David meets Dawn on the road. Dawn regrets recognizing David. She should let David live the life he desires. But David says after becoming young, at first, he was happy to play basketball, but more than winning a game. Looking up again, David has returned to his original self. Then they go to watch their son's game. This is his dad's first time watching his game, so we must win. Through their efforts, they finally win the game at the last moment. David hugs his